Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Digital to Dice podcast. I am Dave.
I'm Ron.
And Ron, we got episode 142 today.
Yes.
And we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary.
2 weeks, right?
I think it is. I think it's the end of the month, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we'll be starting year 4 of this podcast. Holy cow.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll have to do another fireside chat and talk about that, wrap up the last 3 years. We'll definitely have to do that.
It's been an amazing 3 years.
It has been a lot of fun, Met a lot of great people in this industry,
yes, we have, including today's guest, as a matter of fact.
Yes. We talked to author Scott Surgent, and he wrote a book. Actually, it's a statistical book. It's almost like the ultimate media guide, I would say.
Very good, very apt.
Yeah, it's the Complete World Hockey Association. That was the name of the book that he wrote there. And, you know, the WHA was the rival league to the NHL back in the early 70s. And he compiled it's got to be the most complete list of stats for that league in one book. And so we talked to him about that, as well as a few other things. Ways to get a hold of us, digitaltodice.com is the website. 978-751-DICE, that's the text line. You can send us a text. Digitaltodice@yahoo.com is the email, and over on Facebook, facebook.com/groups/digitaltodice. So, without further ado, let's get to our guest. Joining us on the Dice Line, he's the author of the Complete World Hockey Association book. Welcome, Scott Surgent.
Pleasure to have you. Pleasure to be here with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for being on.
Now, you're out in Arizona, and we are recording this on July 3rd. What is the weather in July 3rd in Arizona?
Well, right now it's about 7:06 in the morning, and it's already hot. It's probably going to be in the 105, 110 range.
Oh, you're going triple digits today.
We're always triple digits. A cold day is 95.
Oh, boy. It's going to get hot out here today, but not quite that hot, let me tell you.
It's a dry heat, not like here in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, right now it's humid. We've been getting thunderstorms just about every afternoon.
Oh.
So it's pretty sultry out here.
That's very, very sticky.
But the upside is you get really nice sunsets.
That's true.
All right. So we're going to talk to Scott today about someone who is a math professor in 105-degree heat writing a book about the World Hockey Association. We want to connect those dots today. Now, before we get to those questions, though, Scott, we do have one question we ask all of our guests on the show. If you could go back in time and attend any sporting event, what event would that be?
Oh.
Even one you've already been to, but
yeah.
Anything at all you'd like to go back and see firsthand?
I'd like to go see the 65 Koufax perfect game. One hit in the whole game. I think that would have been a fascinating game to attend. I was not even born yet. I was still about 2 years away. So, but nevertheless, that game just completely fascinates me.
The ninth inning was recorded.
Yes.
And you've heard the Vin Scully's call of that, and that's actually been published as a poetry book, because Scully was so on point that night that it really is. It's poetry.
Well, for him, it was a perfect game too.
At 9:47 in the City of the Angels.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. That's cool. That's a good one, actually. That's a good one.
I'm sorry it wasn't a hockey question.
No, that's okay. It's okay. It's wide open. It's wide open.
It's always amazing when we ask that, if, specifically for someone who's known for one sport, and they give you, I think the horse racing guy gave us a baseball one too, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So. Yeah, it's kind of cool. Okay, so I have your book here. It's not so much a book, it's a statistical book, and this thing is a phone book. Okay, I have it in my hand. It's like I said, I'm trying to see how thick it is right now. I pulled out my ruler. It is 1.5 inches thick, this book. Okay, and again, it's the size of maybe like an old Yellow Pages, and I know our crowd is very aware of the Yellow Pages. We have an older crowd who listens to us. So how do you go from math professor to writing and collecting data for a book about the World Hockey Association?
Oh, boy, that's, out here in Arizona, of course, it's the middle of hockey country. It goes back to when I was a kid. I grew up in the LA area, Los Angeles, and which is not that much hockey country either, especially in the 1970s. But I quickly became enamored with hockey. It became my favorite sport. I watched the Kings all the time whenever they were on. The WHA was sort of this weird other league that got very little coverage. And I think what happened was it planted a seed in my head because I was still a young kid, and this was before internet, so I just couldn't look it up. I didn't really understand its existence. I would hear stories about how great Bobby Hull was, but then I would ask myself, why is he in the WHA? Why isn't he in the NHL? So I had no idea of the history. And then after the two leagues merged in '79, you just didn't hear about the WHA anymore. And so a number of years later, I just kind of ignored that too. But a number of years later, I happened across a couple of items that, old haggard books from that era. And I started reading about the WHA again, and it just kind of caught my fancy, and I figured, I'd like to know more. So I looked around for some books, but I couldn't find anything. And frankly, I just decided to write one for myself. I've never written a book before at that time. I had no idea how to write a book. I had no idea how to get it published. I had no idea of anything. So I just started going to the library, one of the local libraries, and just started pulling out microfilms of newspapers from that era, and really just went day by day, looked at the game scores, read the summaries, and it kind of developed from there. To be honest with you, I thought I would get it about 2 weeks into the project and give up. Something else would distract me. But what happened was the opposite. It became much more fascinating. There were so many stories that I knew that I had something. This was like, a gold mine. There was just so much out there. I said, how in the world is this not known? Why isn't this publicized more? And by comparison, and I didn't really fully appreciate it at the time, but even at the time, I was kind of somewhat aware that when the ABA merged with the NBA, there was still some reference to those old ABA teams. You would hear, say, Julius Erving back when he was with Virginia, for example, or even the Nets when they were in the ABA. But you heard nothing about the WHA. It was really like a campaign to never mention them again. I would hear a mention that Wayne Gretzky started his career in '79 with Edmonton. Well, even then I knew that wasn't true. So I started writing a book, and it took about 1.5 years to put together the first draft. You had asked about how was it easy to do? No, it wasn't. There was really very little information I could find, and I had to do it all the traditional way. I had to go find.
What year are we talking about here?
I started in '93, and I was finished with the first draft roughly in early '95.
Were you in Phoenix at this point, or Southern California?
I was already out here in Arizona. What I started doing is I started going to every sports memorabilia shop I could find in Phoenix. And I actually found quite a bit of information. There was still a lot of Roadrunners paraphernalia that was available. I found a lot of Houston Aeros material too. It was more than I expected. I found a handful of random media guides. So I was piecing it together literally brick by brick. And, I got to a point where I had probably about 75% of what I was hoping to have. And I want to mention a fellow by the name of Ed Nudge, who at the time lived in Glendale, which is a suburb west of Phoenix. And quite by luck, he was selling some media guides. So I called him up and said, hey, I'm writing a book on the WHA. And we agreed to meet, and he had just about every WHA media guide.
Wow! Oh, wow!
From that era, and boy, I'll tell you what, that was the big lucky break that I needed to complete the book. So he allowed me to use them for the research. I eventually bought his stash of media guides, and I still have them. But once I got a hold of those media guides, that filled in a lot of holes. The player statistics were a mess. Part of the intent of writing the book was to get everything as right as possible. I wasn't necessarily looking for like a long narrative book. What I was looking for was to try to put together a statistical summary of the WHA. I wanted every player. I wanted the big guys like Hull and Gretzky and Howe, but I also wanted the guys that showed up for like 3 games. I wanted to make sure everybody got a mention.
Was there something that inspired you to do it that way? Because there's the baseball encyclopedia, and then there's Neft and Cohen, which did that before the days of sportsreference.com and the Hollander books every year that, for the big, what was your inspiration to say, instead of doing the storytelling aspect of it, the statistical aspect of it?
Well, I was always kind of predisposed toward those statistical books.
You are a math professor. I would understand that. Yeah.
And I had those Hollander books growing up. I had them from the early 80s onward.
Dave, do you know what we're talking about with those?
No.
Okay, there was Xander Hollander. I got to be careful because there was someone else with that name that wrote adult stuff. Xander Hollander was based out of New York City, and every year he published in paperback form a preview book for all 4 sports. So there was one for every NBA season. There was one for every NHL season.
I think I told you I had some football ones as a kid, so I probably had some of his as a kid.
And so that's kind of similar to what is going through there, and it gave the complete schedule and roster. Yeah, so that's
okay.
So those were great time. I had a bunch. I don't have them anymore. I had a bunch of those as well. I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
Oh, that's quite all right. No, those were my part of my inspiration. I went to my first NHL game in October of '79, Kings, and they played the Toronto Maple Leafs. I still remember that game. Mike Murphy had 4 goals.
Wow.
And I was 12. My father bought me a media guide. And, boy, I'll tell you what, that was a game changer for me, because I just studied that thing left to right, every page. I just loved the statistical history of it. For me, it was fascinating. I never knew that Terry Sawchuk had played for the Kings, for example. I was already aware that he was a great, goalie of the past. And I look up in the, back of the book and I say, whoa, he was a King for a year. How about that? I thought that was pretty cool. So I used those, those kind of statistical summary books as sort of my basic guideline. One of the things I really wanted to have in the book was a game-by-game summary for each team. I wanted to have the player and goaltender statistics, and I wanted to have the player transaction information. And to me, that was the core. If I could get that together, then I felt I had enough for at least a first draft of a book. Then I realized, okay, I am going to need to add some actual narrative. I started reading a lot. By this time, I was starting to really find a lot of information. I purchased a bunch of hockey news issues from that era. I had access to the sporting news. The Phoenix Library, interestingly enough, has a near complete collection of the sporting news from that era. So I was able to start putting together a historical narrative. And again, it just kind of came together. I'll admit, when I put out my first edition of the book back in '95, I knew that it wasn't 100% complete. I knew that I still lacked things. I felt that I had enough to justify putting the book out. I also knew that more than likely I was going to get a whole bunch of response from people that say, oh, you're missing this. Here, I have this information for you. And that's exactly what happened.
Oh, good.
I must have gotten about 50 people that replied, and they were so helpful. And I, to the best of my memory, I put their names in the thank you section at the front of the book. And I've probably missed a few, but even after, it's been almost 30 years now, I'm still thankful for the input that I got from these people, random people, if you will.
Who took the chance to publish this book? Because there could have been a big demand for that.
I self-published it.
Oh, you self-published?
Yeah, that was the second big hurdle. I didn't know how to get something published. I knew that, of course, you contact publishers and you send a query. But, well, I would go to the bookstores and I would look to see what kind of hockey books are out there. And they seem to fall into two categories. There would be biographies and narratives. And then every now and then you might see a book that's kind of a mishmash. Like, I'm not counting the books that were, or the magazines that were like season previews. I quickly determined that a big statistical compendium is not what is being published. The WHA it didn't have nationwide interest, or at least as far as I knew. And I realized, at least for this first edition, I'm going to do it myself.
Okay.
I spent a number of months reading up on how to do it. It's different from vanity publishing. I put a lot of money into this, and it was basically a risk. And I found a couple places that did printing and binding, and basically put it out that way. So I went through a couple of initial drafts that I showed to a few local, some of my friends, and allowed them to read it just to get an idea of if there's something in there that doesn't look right, so on. But at some point you just have to jump in,
right.
Jump in the pool entirely, and that's what I did. So I basically started advertising in the hockey news, and I wish I could still do that. I got a lot of response. I sold out. I did a print run of 500 for the first edition, and I sold those out in about 3 months.
Oh, wow. Good.
Yeah, I was really, really surprised. Very happily surprised. But I was able to sell them out. I realized, man, there's a lot of people out there that really do want to know about the WHA.
Well, they really just did a lot of unique markets. Cincinnati, Edmonton. I'm trying to look behind Dave here to, Cleveland, Quebec, and places that they weren't in direct competition with NHL teams. Phoenix.
True. Houston, for that matter.
Houston, right.
That is true. And I did get a lot of, orders from those regions. Or, they would just come in from random places in the Canada or the United States. But then they would also include, again, this is back in the day when you would write a check, put it in the mail, send it to the P.O. box that I had. So I would open up, and they would ask for a copy. And there might be a little note in there saying, I followed the New York Raiders, and they were my favorite team back in '72. And I was so sad when they, went out of business. And it was just fun to read because I think these people wanted to just express beyond just purchasing the book, they wanted to express that they were a real fan back in the day. And, by this time it was 20 plus years since, some of those teams went out of business, but they haven't forgotten their interests. And, you can imagine they were probably young kids or teenagers back then. And you kind of grow up with that. Once you adopt a team, that team stays with you until the day you die. I'm 55 years old and I still follow the Kings. I've been following them since I was 9.
Does the hockey news still put out magazines? Are they online only? Are they not around?
They put out like a couple glossies, like season preview or fantasy preview and stuff like that. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't have that same weekly schedule that they used to have. I enjoyed the weekly because that's where you used to get the ongoing statistics and the game summaries and the written summaries. They would have beat writers put in like a short 500-word piece about their local team, and it was just wonderful to read.
Yeah,
and it was definitely where the hardcore hockey fans went.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Everything's instantaneous now.
Everything's so instantaneous. Yeah. I clicked on something a couple weeks ago, and it brought me to the sporting news site. And the same kind of similar, because every Thursday I get the sporting news in the mail and just sit there and devour baseball stats for 2 hours. And in the off-season, read baseball. And at that point, they were still doing, when I first got, they were still doing hockey and basketball box scores. I mean, it really was just the perfect magazine for teenage boys without girlfriends, because it was all there. And so I feel you for that, because I looked forward to that time so much.
I would bet a shiny nickel that most of your viewership or audioship are people like you and me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I love that stuff. I could easily go in and just read it for a day or two and just learn, literally memorize. I could tell you the entire rosters for most NHL teams back then, late 70s, early 80s. That's just what I did. It was absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'm big the same. I'm into math and numbers as well and statistics. I actually run hockey leagues as part of my job, and we have statistics going back 20 years or 22 years, and it's just that stuff is just I really like the numbers part of thing here. Now I'm flicking through your book right now, and so it starts off with a little history of the league, and then it goes into the stadiums, which I thought was kind of neat. And then you got a little brief history of each team that happens there. And then you get, I think, the owners, and then you get into the meat and potatoes. So there's a little summary section in there. It's not just statistics. And so then you go to the seasons, and then it breaks down the season. You get box scores of all the championship game series. And then it gets into the individual teams, what happened with them. Then it goes every single game in the season line scores, and it tells you who played and where, who scored the goals, and who was in net. And then after all that is done at the end, I think it goes over in alphabetical order every single player that played in the league. So did I get that right?
Yeah, you are correct.
So how did you come up with a format for the book? So you got all these statistics, you got different years, different teams, the whole bit. You had to put it in some kind of order. How did you come up with that order?
Well, I mean, in the most general sense, I thought that a narrative should go up front. A lot of it was experimentation. A lot of it was just kind of following my nose. What would I want to see? A lot of it took a lot of clever formatting. That's something I think is unheralded. You can easily write and collect stats and type them in, but you've got to make it all fit. And that was just me trying about 12 different things until I landed on something I liked. And if you go through the earlier editions, you'll notice obviously some changes. How I went from, just the way the line score. Well, actually, the game scores were formatted versus how they are now. So, I suppose that in some sense, I was still channeling back to how would a media guide do it? You would have the player information, maybe a little bit of a summary for the season up front, and then toward the back, you have all the stats.
Okay.
And so that's how I generally did. Beyond that, it was a lot of just trying stuff, basically throwing darts until something hit.
Okay. Now, if anybody out there is playing a WHA season by chance, this covers every season that the league was in existence, every team. And if you're looking for trades and transactions, they are in there, Scott, right? So if you go to, let's say, the I'm looking behind me here, the 74-75 of Minnesota Fighting Saints, right at the end of their little page there, it has transactions for the year. It tells you who they signed and the whole bit. So if you were looking to do some kind of an as-played project with the WHA in this book, you should get pretty darn close to who was on the team at what point.
For the principal players, yes. You would know that so-and-so was traded to, let's say, from Minnesota to, Winnipeg in December. And the information I have ranges from generally the month only. And this was real piecemeal. The sources I had sometimes had it down to the day, but a lot of it was just the month. And I'll admit it was frustrating to try to assemble that and to be consistent with it. So I generally just played it safe and went with the month. For some of the short-term players, I don't have the information specifically when they played. In a few cases, I've been able to determine, through like newspapers.com, which is real nice. I didn't have that back in '93. I wish I did. So-and-so was brought up, as a tryout in March. I haven't included that in these books yet, and honestly, I'm not sure if I will. I just that kind of really minute information is I'm not confident that it's all available.
Okay.
I think I was going to ask you about newspapers.com because I think maybe not Birmingham, but every other WHA city has their daily in full spectrum for the run. So Minneapolis and Hartford and Boston and all of that. If there is to be a 12th edition, what type of things would you be looking to add at this point?
I'm not sure. To be honest with you, I really haven't been planning on a 12th edition yet. And in the past, what usually happens is I find something that A is mostly complete, and B that I think would be a fabulous addition to the book. Mm-hmm. And that's usually why a future edition comes out.
Okay.
I would love to just have the actual summaries put in, but I'll be honest, that would probably be a 1,000-page book at that point.
Oh yeah.
And now with the internet the way it is, I'm not so sure people are going to want to spend $50 for a 1,000-page book. I want to mention, I don't know if you guys know this, but I have a website that I've developed.
Please plug it. Please plug it.
Yeah, it's surgent.net/WHA. SURGENT.net/WHA. And I've actually taken a lot of the information from the book and I've reformatted it into simple HTML. Mm-hmm. And there I'm starting to flesh it out with more details. Now this is an ongoing project, and I'll probably be doing this, for the next 10 years. But for example, I have virtually every player image of all the players. In fact, I was looking the other day, I lack one. There's one player that I've never been able to find his contemporary image from that era. And if anybody has an image for Glenn Critch, who played for Indianapolis, please let me know.
Spell Critch?
Critch.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was a short-term. I know that he came from Newfoundland. He was basically a quickie sign-up, and then basically went right back to Newfoundland and played in the senior leagues there. But he's the only player that I cannot find an image for. It's almost like he just showed up and went like a ghost in the wind.
Now, is the Hockey Hall of Fame they must be aware of what you've done.
Yeah, I actually haven't been in contact with him for a long time. Early on, I got a few people contacting me from the HOF, and I think they were just more curious about what I was doing. Beyond that, there hasn't been much contact. And I'll be honest, I haven't reached out to them in a while either. I've got my day job to worry about. And I've actually been writing a couple other books, non-hockey related. So I'm a textbook author too. I've co-written a couple of calculus textbooks that are used in various colleges.
Oh, cool.
So you teach your own stuff. That's great.
Yeah.
So you're going to be able to afford the season ticket for when the Coyotes come to campus starting next year for the next 3 years?
I probably won't go to all the games, but I'm definitely going to go to a few. I live, only about 3 or 4 miles from the campus, and probably I'm not really sure where the rink is being built, but it's going to be close by. I'm actually really thrilled that they're coming, at least temporarily, to play on ASU's campus. I'm thrilled that ASU's hockey team is really developing into something worth watching. And I'm thrilled that, frankly, the Coyotes are getting out of the Glendale situation. That is probably
that's been terrible for a long time.
And I've heard people saying, "Well, Phoenix hates hockey." No, I don't think that's true. I think we love hockey. We just don't like driving 2 hours in traffic to go to a game that's in a rink, and it's a beautiful rink. I don't want to say anything bad about it. It's an absolutely gorgeous arena, but it's way out there. It's about a 35, 40-mile drive from where I live, for example, and and you have to go across Phoenix to get there. And if it's a Tuesday night, who's going to want to deal with traffic? So
right.
I think that moving to the East Valley, which is Mesa, Tempe, Chandler, Gilbert, Scottsdale, I think it's going to be a huge boost for the Coyotes. And in a way, let the WHA live on a little more. We've got actually two connections, the original Winnipeg Jets.
Right.
And it's also maybe a way to leverage the old Roadrunners interest. I'll say this, when I would go to the Coyotes games and even the minor league Roadrunners back in the 90s, you would see a lot of people wearing like an old Fedoric jersey from the 70s. There were a lot of people there that knew their hockey. They might be the only people in Phoenix that knew their hockey, but it was still fun to talk to them.
The Coyotes haven't embraced that. I know that Carolina's done some Whaler nights, and there's always some panic up in Quebec every time that the Nords, the Avs bring out the Nords jerseys and stuff. And so, have they embraced the Roadrunner history at all, or
not that I know of? No. And again, I don't want to go off on a tangent,
right,
about the team, but they've been slow to really embrace the Phoenix hockey history. I have reached out to them, not in a number of years, and I got zero response.
Oh, that's too bad.
It's frustrating. I think they could leverage that better.
Okay. Yeah, getting back to the book, we interviewed an author who wrote a book about 1899 baseball not that long ago. And imagine writing a book about 1899, anything, right? And we asked him about some of the challenges in writing a book that was from 1899. What did you run into in writing a book as far as your challenges, as far as getting information and writing stuff and the whole bit for a league that was basically ran for 8 years in the 70s?
It was just simply locating information that was locating enough information and ideally all of the information I could to put together a book. I found the 75-76 media guide almost immediately. I found a shop that had it and I bought it. And then it took for, I don't know, probably 6-8 months before I could find another one. This is where Mr. Nudge in Glendale came in so handy. Again, this is back in the early mid-90s, 93, 94, 95, and this information, you couldn't just Google WHA. You couldn't just, do something like that. You had to go and find it, and that was the biggest challenge, was just getting the information assembled. One of the things that I discovered real fast was that the player statistics were a mess. They didn't add up. They lacked detail. That was a real challenge. Took a lot of effort to unravel. It got to the point where, to the best I could, because again, this was, I didn't have newspapers.com to access or other resources that easily. I literally would build the player stats box score by box score to make sure that things added up. To me, the internal consistency was important. I don't like it when, let's say you add up the goals for a team that add up to like 305, but that the team actually scored 310.
Oh, yeah.
It's clearly an error.
Yeah.
And it was just sloppy. Now, again, this was the 70s. I'm sure that they were probably typesetting things with little metal typesetting things. But nevertheless, it was sloppy. It was poorly done. It was there was not a whole lot of auditing. And, some of the media guides were just junk. They didn't, the information in there just wasn't dependable. And again, on the other extreme, there were a lot of media guides. It was obvious that the team put a lot of work to make sure everything was good. So, I want to give the shout outs to the appropriate people.
Did the moving and folding of teams create any bonus problems for you? There's a lot of franchises that moved around, and some mid-season, and some, frankly, disappeared mid-season too. So I was wondering if that was just another thorn in the side in creating this.
Not really. It was. I just wanted to understand. Okay, what were the details? Why the team moved? Now, it was easy to infer that they weren't doing well in their current city. They'd run out of money for various reasons. But why? Why did they suddenly uproot and move? What was the tipping point? And again, it just fell down. It just kind of fell into the task of finding whatever information I could to determine that. The one part that always kind of intrigued me was when Denver moved to Ottawa. That was the 75-76 season. And technically, they really never moved to Ottawa. They ended up playing a couple of games in Ottawa, ostensibly as the home team. They were still essentially the Denver Spurs. They wore their Denver sweaters. But I wanted to understand, A, what caused them to move suddenly, and B, since that team only lasted a few games, why couldn't they stick it out for another few weeks? Why couldn't Ottawa come through and maybe fund the team at least for, I don't know, a month or two while they found a buyer? It was kind of, those are bits that I really wanted to understand. It basically boiled down to is that Mullinex needed money like yesterday, and he couldn't stick around for a buyer. And but those are the kind of details that I wanted to understand. And so it proved to be a challenge.
Is there one team that sticks out that was the hardest team to get any information for? Was there one team that you're like, man, I got everybody, but this team here, I'm missing a few things, and I just can't find anything on them?
In the early years, yes and no. I was able to get the statistical information generally wrapped up fairly quickly. So that wasn't the hard part. I think like the early LA Sharks, some of those very early teams, Chicago, for example, they went through about 3 or 4 different ownership groups early on, but I couldn't really find good information of who and why. So getting some of that information, especially during that early to mid 72 era when the teams were being put together and arena leases were being figured out, in some cases it was very well covered and I could find information. In other cases, nothing. I really had very little luck in finding meaningful. I found snippets, but that was about it. Now, that was early on. Over the years, of course, I've been able to dig up more useful information and put together what I think is about as complete a narrative as possible. Although I will admit, I probably don't know everything. I still get surprised. I still get the random email or generally these days the email. And they'll say, oh, by the way, you might want to know about this. Here's a little factoid you can use. And hey, great. Any little bit helps.
Okay.
Did alumni associations or the 4 surviving teams, were you able to work with any of them to get any of the narrative information? Or
I early on I got some feedback from Edmonton. Bill Tuella, it was the PR director for the team. I think he joined the team at their very end of their time in the WHA. And then he stuck with the team for quite some time when they joined the NHL. He was very helpful. He gave me some leads to follow. He didn't necessarily have information that he could just dump in my lap, like stats, but he at least told me, oh, you might want to contact this guy. He's working here. The Nordiques were, at least they responded. They gave me permission to use the logo. The other 2 teams did not. And this is where I think I had a missed opportunity, is that at the time, Frank Polnazek, who was the statistician for the WHA, was working for the Hartford Whalers. I had sent the Whalers just a general letter. Hey, I'm writing a book on the WHA. If you can help me, that'd be great. Here's how to contact me. Well, I never heard from them, and I was not aware that Mr. Polnazek was working for the team at the time. I just simply didn't know. Mm-hmm. Didn't know that for like a year or 2 later, and kind of frustrates me even then. If I had known that he was there, I might have contacted him directly. So that to me, that's just a missed opportunity. Winnipeg, they were quiet as well. So, but this was just more of a shooting the puck from mid ice. I wasn't expecting that they were going to jump out of their seats and help some unknown guy out in Phoenix to write a
right.
book, which is not unexpected. I was appreciative for whatever assistance I did get.
Okay. Was this fun? Is it still fun?
Actually, it is. It's quite a bit of fun. I I enjoy the challenge of assembling the book, and I still enjoy researching. It's almost like hunting for Easter eggs. You find something and you say, wow, I'll bet you I'm the only person in the world that knows this. Now, obviously it may have been known back in, I'll say 77, but of course everybody in the world has probably forgotten it. And so I find some little nugget of information, and you still get that kind of thrill of the discovery. And when I'm able to find something, of course, I keep tabs on it. If I'm able to find something that I think is a significant new addition, that's when. So a new addition. That's when a new edition with an E becomes something that formulates in my mind. It's been 4 years since I put out the 11th edition. My bad. So of course, the natural question is: there going to be a 12th? Well, I'm not going to say no. I'm not actively working on it. I am, always on the lookout for information that's out there. So you never know. If it happens, I'll put it on my website and give you guys a buzz too. So, but it could be a year from now, it could be 3 years from now.
What surprised you most putting together this book?
To me, it was the richness of the league, and at the time, it was quite ahead of its time. There was a lot of controversy, but there was also a lot of what I think was very clever foresight among those teams. For example, I never really appreciated the risk it took for teams like the Jets and the Whalers back in '74 and the Toros to go get these guys from Europe. You took it for granted. Even in the 80s, there was a fair number of European players in the NHL, and you figure, well, why not? They're good hockey players. But, in that era, 73, 74, 75, 76, there was a lot of controversy about bringing over these Europeans. And, boy, that was really interesting to read that and to gain an appreciation for the kind of risk it took. So, and also just the fervor of the city for its team. Even though the teams may not have been successful financially, it was clear that there was definitely an interest in these teams by the fans and the media to whatever extent possible. So, I guess what the WHA didn't have in a lot of these cities was a lot of the casual fans, and that's something that just develops over time. They had a core of very intense fans, and I was able to find articles, items, and things like that really at the time just kind of underscored the not only the interest but the significance that the WHA had on hockey in that era.
Okay.
You appreciate stuff better that existed, say, post-1980 and even post-1990 that you can trace back to the WHA. I think that, having teams in Florida could be, you can draw a through line from, trying to put a team in Miami and even putting a team in Birmingham. I know that the Atlanta teams didn't work out, but to make that kind of move, I think in Houston, it showed that hockey, for example, they like their hockey. Basically, if you go to a game or two and you keep an open mind, you're hooked immediately.
Right. Live hockey is one of the better experiences. It really is.
It is. As much as I love baseball, it's difficult to sit there and watch a full 9-inning game. But hockey, boy, just the sound of the skates, the puck, the guys hitting each other.
It's a fast game.
It's fast. And also, it's the only sport where you can't score multiple points at once.
That's true.
You get one goal at a time. So if you're down by 2 goals, you've got to have 3 scores. It's not like in football where you can maybe get a field goal or a touchdown. Baseball, you get a 3-run home run. Basketball, 3-point play. In hockey, it's 1 point at a time. And you don't know the goal is going to be scored until it's scored. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In baseball, you can watch a ball sail out and you go, okay, this is going to be a home run. You get a couple seconds there of excitement. In hockey, until the puck's in the net, you don't know it's good. You're not guaranteed of a score. And the excitement of the fans, that's what hooked me. To me, I guess all these things together just turned me into a hockey nut after all these years.
It's easy. I'm a hockey nut. Do you think you met the goal when you started out to write this book? You probably had a goal in mind. You think you met that goal?
I'll speak as a mathematician. I'm approaching that goal as a limit. I think that I'm there about 98.5%. I would still like to get together just to clear up some holes. That's really about it. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't have a complete and dependable set on all player transactions. I would like to get that put together. I would like to just fill up some holes in terms of some event that I've never really understood. I'll be honest. There was a team that was going to be put in San Francisco back in '71. So this is when they were first putting together the teams. Are you familiar with that? It's the team that eventually became the Nordiques.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Gary Davidson, who was co-founder of the league, was going to own the San Francisco team. That was in, let's say, November of '71. In February of '72, the rights to that team were sold to a group from Quebec. I've really not been able to find much information about the San Francisco team. My gut tells me that I can't imagine that putting a team in San Francisco was a good idea, especially at the time.
Not with the Golden Seal struggling.
Not in '71, yeah.
Yeah, so the Golden Seal, and even the Kings were barely limping along back then. It stands to reason that obviously Quebec was a better bet. Immediately there was a natural rivalry between the Nordiques and the Canadiens. But I've never found that one definitive piece of what was the reason behind that. I don't think that there was any intention to keep a team in San Francisco. It may have just been a placeholder team until another group got its stuff worked out. I don't have 100% certainty. That's the frustrating part.
I'm a completionist and I'm a perfectionist too. And being a numbers guy, you want everything to add up. It bothers me too. There's things to this day, products. It irks me that one thing is just not right, and it still irks me. So I hear you on that.
Well, I still, in the back of my mind, I'm still aware that I lack this, I lack that, and it bugs me.
Did you get anything on
that's why I try to get the book as complete as possible.
How much info did you get on the Miami Screaming Eagles?
Actually, I was pretty good with that because they made a lot of. They were probably the most active team very early on in terms of generating publicity. They signed Bernie Prant. He was the first star player to sign with the WHA. That was very early. When was it? Like January or February of '72. Honestly, I don't remember the date exactly. I'm doing this off the top of my head. They were going after Derek Sanderson at the time. They were going to be in Miami. That in and of itself was going to be a big thing. It was actually fairly easy to come up and find information on the Screaming Eagles. They didn't last very long. Of course, it just came down. They couldn't get the arena built. One team, another team that I've really been able to find very little useful information on is the Calgary team.
The Cowboys?
The Cowboys. No, it was the team that was the precursor to the Cleveland Crusaders.
Oh, okay.
So, are you familiar with that situation?
No.
The original, in November '71, when they announced the first 10 teams, because they announced the other two teams a little later. The plan was to put a team both in Edmonton and in Calgary, which is a natural, good idea. But unfortunately, the Calgary team fell apart almost immediately. The owner became ill and he died almost immediately. I mean, a matter of weeks. And the team just kind of lingered and then just went out of business. So they basically just shut down operations and didn't answer phone calls and things like that. Scotty Monroe is going to be, if I remember correctly, he was going to be the general manager. But they didn't do anything beyond that. And there's really very little information. I've been able to access the Calgary newspapers from that era, but even then it's virtually nothing. I've never even seen a logo. It would be interesting for me to see a Calgary Broncos logo that was going to be used for the WHA team.
And then obviously never even played a game. So
no, I don't. Yeah, they were really dead in the water pretty much from the get go. Which is
wasn't an extra sense of excitement because it was going to be a quote unquote major league market.
Yeah. Actually, Calgary, even in '72, they I absolutely believe the team could have worked there. I also keep in mind, and this also happened with the Cowboys. They didn't have a rink big enough that the team could support themselves on gate receipts alone. And this is in an era when you didn't have multi-billion-dollar TV contracts. They played at the Stampede Corral, which I think sat less than 5,000. And even if they sold out every night, they were going to lose money. That's an unfortunate reality. At least in Edmonton, the Oilers originally played at what was called the Edmonton Gardens, and this was like an arena built in the 1930s, give or take, and it was small. It seated only about 5,000, but what would become the Northlands Coliseum was being built. So Edmonton at least had a viable, tangible arena that was going to be built soon. Calgary did not have that. There was always talk about having some major league arena being built. Even in the 70s, they were talking about it, but it never really got off the ground. And the Saddle Dome, which eventually was the build, that was still way off in the future. It's much too late to help the WHA.
Do you think that if this WHA league staggered their start or their finish time instead of starting exactly the same time and finishing exactly the same time as the NHL, that would have helped the league at all if they had started in, say, September or maybe started in December and went a little bit longer? But starting and going head-to-head exactly the NHL, do you think they would have been better off doing something like that?
I don't know. I think there's a strong tradition in having hockey go from October to April, maybe early May back then. In some ways, I think they were fairly traditional in that manner. I think, I don't know if the players would have been keen on that. Say you're coming from the NHL and you're going to the WHA, suddenly you've got 6 months off between, or 8 months, depending on who you played for, between starting the next season. So I don't know. I'll say this, though. I think that the biggest challenge with the WHA was to, when they went head-to-head with the NHL, they invariably lost. Even though some of the WHA teams were better, in my opinion, than their NHL teams in the city, I think that was probably the biggest challenge. There was also the challenge that in the eye of the casual hockey fan, there was still this minor league image. Like, if they're so good, why aren't they in the NHL attitude? To kind of go off in a particular direction here, the teams that were going to be placed, well, New York and Chicago, for example, you look back and you say, well, that didn't work out. What were they thinking? Well, I think at the time it was a good idea to place a team in New York and Chicago. They're big hockey markets. They're big markets. And had those teams worked out, let's say the New York team was able to play at Uniondale. Let's say the NHL never expanded that year. Let's say equivalently in Chicago, that arena in Rosemont was built in time, not in 1980. I think having a strong team in at least one of those two cities would have been huge for the WHA. Absolutely huge. I think it would have worked out. I think that, New York is huge. They could have easily supported two teams. When the Raiders came into existence and the Islanders, of course, kind of blocked them out of the Uniondale Arena, suppose that New Jersey had already had a quality arena. I think it could have worked out for the Raiders as New Jersey's team. We see now that it clearly works with the Devils. Having three teams within a 50-mile radius is not hurting any of the teams, it appears.
No, it's working.
It could have worked in 72. Of course, this is speculation. But it could have worked. In some ways, maybe it was an idea ahead of its time. Maybe it was too radical to have suddenly two new teams in New York in 1 year. But the idea was sound. So, and now when you talk about the other big city in the United States, L.A., and of course I'm LA-centric here. And again, in 72, the Kings were barely on the radar. They were not a good team. And so putting a second team in LA was kind of iffy. Maybe they go down to San Diego immediately. That might have worked out. Maybe not. Who knows? Maybe they moved to Orange County. Well, they didn't have an arena at the time. So that's a case where I think that was probably a little way ahead of its time. Not surprised that the Sharks just floundered.
They still had a cool logo, though.
Yeah, they did. Actually, I thought they had some of the sharpest looking uniforms in the WHA. I loved the piping. I loved that red and the black and white stripes on the red jersey.
Yeah, they were nice.
It was sharp.
Have you seen the show on Hulu, the hockey show called Shoresy?
I have not. No.
If you're a hockey fan, you should check it out. It's on Hulu. It's called Shoresy, Shoresy. It's about a fictitious hockey player named Shore, and they call him Shoresy as a nickname. And he's up in Canada playing in Sudbury in a league up there. And it's basically Slapshot in 2022. It really is. So if you get a chance, you want to check it out. I tell all my hockey friends, if you're a hockey fan, get Hulu for a month, and it's 6 episodes. It's not very long, and it's just hilarious hockey stuff that goes on. So I just like to ask people if they've seen that. But anyway, Ron, you got any more questions for Scott?
Yeah. At what point did the WHA realize that they were going to have the shotgun wedding with the NHL?
I think it was in 75, 76 when you started having the teams fail. Early on, I think they propped up a couple of teams. They propped up the Raiders, the Jersey Knights. Well, that was basically a league-run team. But I think they were trying to keep all the teams active to at least, having teams fail very early on would have looked really bad. Mm-hmm. There was actually some merger discussions going on as early as 1973.
Oh, wow.
This was more of just kind of the feeler variety. A couple of individuals from the NHL met with a couple of individuals from the WHA just to talk. Nobody was deputized to make decisions, but it was more or less just to kind of discuss. But, when you get to 76, especially early 76, you get the Denver-Ottawa team fails. The Minnesota team fails. And I think when the Minnesota team failed, that was a huge hit because Minnesota really is a fabulous market. It should have worked. They had a good team. They had great players. And the fact that the Fighting Saints failed, I think, really was a big hit to the WHA. Between January of 76 and I would say the summer of 77, they lost, was it 6 teams? They really shrunk. I think it was actually 8 teams. They lost Phoenix, San Diego, Calgary. Oh, geez. Of course, they lost Denver, Ottawa, and Minnesota. They lost the second Minnesota team. I know I'm forgetting 1 or 2.
I think they only finished with, 6 or 8 teams at the last year.
They finished with 6. Yeah. By 70, there was a vote in 77 for the 2 leagues to merge, and it was close. And in the 77 merger, it was going to be 6 teams from the WHA. It was going to be the 4 that got in.
Birmingham and Cincinnati, right?
Actually, it was going to be Houston and Cincinnati.
Okay.
That was close. In fact, it was really close. It was 2 votes short of being approved. Now, of course, this didn't just happen immediately. There had been merger discussions going on for at least a year prior. I think at that point, the WHA kind of laid down its cards and basically told the world, we want to join the NHL. They weren't, being quiet about it. At that point, I think the WHA was coming in for the landing, so to speak. It was going to be difficult to attract new buyers to buy into the league when they knew the WHA itself was trying to merge with the NHL. So from 77 onward, that was basically their primary goal, was to get at least 4 of their primary teams into the NHL. Houston and Cincinnati kind of were in the gray area. Houston had the house, but they had a great team. They had a fabulous team, but they still struggled. And this is an era when teams really tried to get by just on gate receipts alone. Cincinnati, it's Ohio. It's kind of borderline hockey country, but still, they had the DeWitt family owning it. They had the Heekin family owning it. These are people with a lot of resources. It was a well-run team. They just didn't draw fans. They would draw their usual 5,000, and that was about it. Had the expansion happened in 77, and suddenly these teams are in the NHL, I think that probably would have helped the teams. But who knows what would have happened in the long term. We've seen, obviously, the Atlanta team didn't last. The Flames failed when they were in Atlanta. I can only speculate. I have no idea. But yes, by 77 forward, it was the WHA was really pushing hard to get merger.
Right. Now, did I hear that when they were voting on, I don't know if it was the first, second, or third time they voted on the merger, that a lot of the Canadian teams were the ones voting no because they didn't want to split the TV revenue or any kind of attention up there.
Huge. It was Hockey Night in Canada.
And is that where I heard that there was a big boycott of Molson beer and so the Canadians had to tip their hand and convince Vancouver to vote yes?
Well, it was, and that's what I found. That was something that just completely floored me when I first discovered that. I thought, wait a minute, there had been a lot of complaints back in the 70s that, there's only 3 teams out of 18 that were in Canada. Why aren't there more teams in Canada? And suddenly you've got this opportunity to admit Edmonton, Quebec, and Winnipeg. And the 3 Canadian teams voted no. And I thought, wow, that's just amazing. You would think they would have been first on board. Well, they had their reasons, of course. Montreal didn't want Quebec in their territory. Toronto, with Ballard in charge, they weren't going to vote yes ever. Vancouver, I think their main concern was, we're not going to get the East Coast teams as much. There was the issue of money, splitting revenues, And so when the Montreal team voted no, this is in 79. So by 79, I think the merger, everybody wanted merger. It was clearly seen, we've got to do this. I don't know if everybody was happy about it, but I think it was seen that really to keep hockey viable, we need to at least do something. So in the 79 vote, it was the same teams that voted no in 77, except for the Islanders. They went ahead and voted yes, but it was still short by 2 teams. And so when Montreal voted no, that's when the Quebec people, that's when they began this beer boycott of Molson. And at the time, Quebec was owned by Labatt's, or partially owned by Labatt's Brewery. And it's ironic. Yeah, it worked. I don't know. I wouldn't say that it alone caused the change of vote. I think it was more of a public relations issue. I really think Montreal tripped on this one. It just seemed kind of selfish to at least not to admit 3 teams, but in particular the Nordiques. As we saw, especially in the 80s, that was a wonderful rivalry.
Yes.
It was an amazing rivalry. It was probably the best thing that happened to the Canadians at the time. All of a sudden, they had another French-speaking city, hardcore fans. They hated each other. Boy, those games were something else, weren't they? And I'll go on record. I would love to see a team back in Quebec.
I think everybody
I
would.
think it would be good for the league to be back in Quebec.
I think it would actually be wonderful for the league. That was a huge rivalry. I'm happy for the Avalanche. Denver's now a good hockey city. They just won the cup. That's great for them. But I think it was a real shame. Well, it was a real shame when each of the original, three of the WHA teams had to move. And certainly, Hartford, boy, they missed their Whalers. The Jets, now, of course, they have the new Jets. But there's still a lot of, pining for the history of the original Jets. But, so when they did the merger vote in -- it was really Montreal and Vancouver that switched their votes to make it happen. And again, reading the accounts, it was almost like it was going to happen. We just need to kind of twist some arms to make it happen.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. So. And I knew none of this when I started my book. I had no idea. Didn't know about the Molson Brewery issue. I didn't know about, I didn't even know the 3 Canadian teams had voted no. I didn't even know how the vote worked. I figured, at some point somebody snapped their fingers and it was a done deal.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. It was interesting. So, all right. So where can we find your book now? The Complete World Hockey Association. Where can we find this now?
Well, it's for sale on Amazon. And if you just simply type in World Hockey Association, it should come right up. You can type in my last name, Surgent. It comes right up. I have a website. So I mentioned it earlier. The main page is surgent.net. And from there, you can see links to some of the pages that I run. So there's a link to the WHA book ordering site. So I have 2 books. I have the big book that you held up, and I also have the smaller fact book.
Okay.
That's only, I think it's sell for $20. And the idea there was to kind of trim it down for somebody who maybe wants to know about the WHA but doesn't really care about how many power play goals so-and-so scored back in 75, 76. And so I have ordering information with links there. Those are probably the 2 main, that's the main site to get them from. In this day and age, if you're looking to buy a book, where you're going to think to go? Probably right. Amazon.
Yeah.
And so that's generally where I sell through. It is my understanding there's a few random outlets that sell the book, but I don't know. I don't ever see them on the bookshelves here in Phoenix, so
okay.
I'm still working on that.
All righty. Anything else, Ron, before we wrap it up?
No, I'm good. Thanks. No, this was fun.
Yeah, this is a good time. So, Scott Surgent, author of the Complete World Hockey Association, and I have the 11th edition. That's the one that I have. That's the big one. It's 8.5 by 11 by 1.5 inches thick. This is a foam book, people. So if you look,
35 pages of hockey.
It is. It's not only just stats, so there's a lot of history in there as well, and it recaps the teams and the whole bit. So there's a lot of learning here if you want to learn about the WHA. But if you're like us and you are playing a game with the WHA, this is the guide to have it if you're looking to see who played where and when and how and the whole bit. And how. You like how I work in how to hockey talk?
Very well done, Gordy. Very well done.
Scott.
Right on the mark, right?
That's right. Oh, boy. So,
hey, Mike.
Hey, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, I thank you guys for hosting me. And again, thanks for being patient as we kind of worked out when we could meet. I had a whole bunch of stuff going on, so this is great. And nothing, Sunday morning, this is fun. I love talking hockey.
All right. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, by the numbers, episode 142, another fun interview. I love talking to authors. I love asking people why they wrote books and what was the inspiration and what was the goal behind it all. And sometimes it's just a labor of love.
And that's exactly what it was for him. I mean, as we talked about, he was, math professor at Arizona State. And so I figured his connection would have been the Roadrunners and his love of math. And it was neither of those 2 things. It was growing up a kid in Southern California.
Yeah. Southern Cal boy writing a World Hockey Association book. That is so cool.
I just think that was so cool. And of course, the secret was that he did that interview with, he's 3 hours behind us, and so it was 7 a.m. on Sunday morning when we taped that for him. But he was glad to do it. He was glad to do it. So. Again, as you said in the open, the ultimate media guide. He should be very proud of his work.
Yeah, and in fact, we talked a little off air. We might have him on for a Saturday night chat at some point.
I would think that would be great,
and that'd be fun. So again, because I know we have a lot of WHA fans that listen to us and like to play the odd leagues like that, or just hockey in general. So it'd be fun to have him on for a nice Saturday night chat live one night.
Just remember, he's not a gamer, so don't ask him how to play.
It would be
and stuff. He's not going to know any of that.
It would be more questions about the league and hockey and the whole bit. And I think it'd be a fun and fascinating interview to have him back on and take questions just about, because we ask him a lot of questions, but I suppose there's other ones that people are going to ask, like, how did the Southern Cal guy, get into hockey in the early 70s?
And maybe someone has some of the answers to the questions that he didn't have, such as how does a team that was supposed to go to San Francisco end up in Quebec?
Yeah.
I think for that, because just like we did for Thomas Hetrick with the Spiders, although Thomas is a gamer. As far as a WHA chat, there probably aren't that many out there.
No, there's not. So that was a fun one. All righty. Ways to get a hold of us again. digitaltodice.com is the website. 978-751-DICE is the dice line. Send us a text. digitaltodice@yahoo.com is the email. And over on Facebook, facebook.com/groups/digitaltodice. All right, Ron, again, thanks for joining me.
As always.
And we'll talk to everybody next time.
Bye-bye. You did record that, right?
Yes.